My son looked into my eyes and said, "If you don't listen to my wife, get out." I didn't argue. I smiled, took my suitcase and quietly left. A week later, 33 missed calls. I always believed that if you gave your children everything, your time, your wisdom, your money, they'd remember. Not because they had to, not because they owed you, but because they wanted to. I didn't expect gratitude, but I never expected betrayal. When I walked into their home that day, it wasn't supposed to be a farewell. I had helped them buy the place, helped them get their mortgage approved, paid the down payment. I had done it gladly. It was what a father was supposed to do. I'd spent my entire life working so my son wouldn't have to struggle like I did. I thought that was the goal, to give the next generation a better shot. But something had changed. The first time she asked me to mind my business at the dinner table, I let it slide. I figured she was tired. When she asked me not to rearrange the kitchen cabinets, even though I was the one cooking dinner most nights, I apologized. When she said she wanted more space, I quietly looked into rental options the next day. Not because I wanted to leave, but because I didn't want to be the kind of father-in-law who overstayed his welcome. I never expected it would come to that moment in the living room, standing by the staircase, suitcase in hand, and my own son looking at me like a stranger. His voice didn't tremble. His hands didn't shake. He said it plain and cold. "If you don't listen to my wife, get out." I didn't argue. I didn't shout or demand an explanation. I just looked at him, really looked, and tried to find the boy I once carried on my shoulders. The one I stayed up with during fevers. The one who cried when I dropped him off on his first day of school. He wasn't there anymore, so I smiled. Quietly, I picked up my suitcase, gave the dog one last scratch behind the ears, and left. It was raining. Fitting. That night I didn't cry. I didn't drink. I didn't call anyone. I just sat in my car in a quiet corner of the city, thinking about all the times I said no to myself so I could say yes to them. And for what? By morning, I had found a cheap motel on the edge of town. It smelled like mildew and cigarettes, and the water pressure was laughable, but I didn't care. It gave me time to think. It gave me silence. It gave me space. A week passed. 7 days without hearing from him. Not a text. Not a call. Not even a message to ask if I needed anything. And then 33 missed calls. All from the same number. I didn't answer. Not out of spite. Not at first. But because I wanted to see how long it would take before he remembered I was his father. Not a nuisance to be discarded. The messages started pouring in. "Dad, call me back. Please, it's urgent. She didn't mean it. There's been a mistake. She's sorry. We need you." And then finally, "I'm sorry. But sorry doesn't fix a door that was slammed in your face. Sorry doesn't undo the feeling of being treated like a burden in a home you helped build. Sorry doesn't rewind time." Still, I read every message, listened to every voicemail, and then I started planning. I didn't sleep much that first night. Even with my eyes shut, my mind kept replaying the moment over and over, like a needle stuck in a groove. My son's voice, emotionless, cutting, like a lawyer reading a verdict he didn't care to deliver. "If you don't listen to my wife, get out." Not, "Dad, can we talk?" Not even, "We're having trouble." Just a command, a dismissal. I wasn't a person in that moment. I was a nuisance, an obstacle, something to remove and forget. I didn't respond to the calls. Not because I wanted revenge. Not at first. I just wanted silence. I wanted to sit in a room without being told I was doing too much or not enough. I wanted to be away from the performance, from the small smiles at dinner, from the tension in the room whenever she sighed and looked at her phone. I wanted to breathe. And most of all, I wanted to see how long it would take before he remembered I was his father. Not his handyman, not his wallet, not a temporary inconvenience. The motel was filthy. The carpet was damp, and there were yellow stains on the ceiling. But it had one luxury: solitude. I sat on the edge of the bed for hours, staring at my phone, watching the missed calls climb like an odometer. I didn't block him. I didn't delete the messages. I read each one. I wanted him to twist in that space between guilt and confusion. Let him stew. Let him wonder where I went, what I was thinking, if I was okay. He started with please, then apologies, then panic. Please call me. She didn't mean it. There's been a misunderstanding. Things aren't going well. We need you. And finally, I'm sorry. But sorry is cheap when it's only said because everything's falling apart. On the 5th day, he came to the motel. I saw him through the peephole. He looked like hell. Sunken cheeks, red eyes, like he hadn't slept since I left. He knocked once, then again. He stood there, not moving, as if the door would open out of guilt. But I didn't move. I watched him wait, and then slowly walk away, shoulders slumped, like a little boy who lost something he didn't realize he needed. That was when I knew it wasn't about getting even. It was about teaching a lesson he'd never forget. A lesson in consequences. A lesson in loss. He thought I was soft because I gave too much. Because I picked up after his mistakes. Because I wrote the checks, mended the fences, and stayed silent while his wife rolled her eyes every time I corrected her on how to boil a damn egg. But there's a difference between kindness and weakness. And now he was going to learn that difference one brutal inch at a time. I started small with silence. Silence can be more punishing than rage. Silence forces reflection. It makes the mind loop, spiral, pick apart every detail. While he tore himself up trying to figure out what came next, I started writing. I wrote a list of everything I had done. Every time I had bailed him out. Every time I swallowed my pride. Every sacrifice. Not for him to see. Not yet. For me. To remind myself that I wasn't crazy. That I hadn't imagined the years of devotion, of loyalty, of quiet servitude. Then I moved to the next phase. He worked at a boutique architectural firm, a place he only got into because I pulled some strings. He thought he earned that job on his own. He thought the interviews and portfolio did it. But I was the one who made the calls. I was the one who called in favors with people who owed me from 20 years ago. So I made another set of calls. No threats. Just casual conversations with old friends. Subtle shifts in tone. Quiet reminders that I was no longer backing him. That he was on his own. That if he failed now, I wouldn't be the one catching him. Within days, 2 major projects were reassigned. Within a week, a client dropped out. The foundation under his carefully constructed image began to shake. I wasn't destroying his career. I was removing the scaffolding and letting gravity do the rest. Then came the real pressure home. He had married a woman who didn't love him. She loved the life he could give her. The house, the security, the help, especially the help. She loved that I did the yard work, made the repairs, paid for the nanny. That I took their kids to school, babysat when she needed her yoga retreats, and filled their fridge with groceries before they even noticed it was low. She wasn't built for self-sufficiency, so I stopped helping. I pulled the plug on everything. No more payments, no more favors, no more weekend pickups. The fridge stayed empty. The grass grew wild. The kids missed appointments. The laundry piled up, and she snapped. Their arguments grew louder, more frequent. I didn't have to be there to know it. Neighbors talked. Voices raised, doors slammed, someone crying in the driveway. He had chosen her over me, and now she was falling apart without me. 3 weeks in, he sent another text.
Dad, I'm sorry.
She was wrong. I was wrong. I didn't reply. For weeks in, he left a letter.
No envelope.
Just folded paper and a photograph tucked inside. Him sitting on my shoulders years ago in the front yard. Both of us smiling. I stared at it for a long time. Longer than I should have. That picture hit harder than any insult. But I didn't break. That was the real battle, not letting sentimentality dull the blade. This wasn't about love. Love had been given. Love had been trampled. This was about respect, and he had to earn it. The next move was the bank. I still co-owned the second property they rented out. He never took me off the deed. I contacted a lawyer, quietly, without warning, filed paperwork to reclaim my share, froze the income. They counted on that rent money like oxygen, and now it was gone. I could picture them checking their accounts, wondering why the transfer never came, panicking, blaming each other. Good. I wanted him to feel how cold the world gets when your safety net disappears. By the end of the 5th week, the messages stopped being calm. They got frantic. Dad, we're going to lose the house. She's threatening to leave. The kids don't understand. I need you. But he didn't need me. He needed what I gave, what I built, what I provided. And I was no longer interested in being a vending machine of affection and rescue. I moved out of the motel, into a small house, quiet and out of the way. No neighbors, no distractions, just space. I fixed up the garage, started working with wood again. Hands stained with varnish, lungs full of sawdust, heart finally still. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't update my address. I became a ghost. And yet, he kept searching, calling old friends, asking around, posting online, even messaging distant relatives. He started leaving voicemails not like a son begging for help, but like a man trying to reach a ghost before it disappears forever. That's when I started writing again. Not lists, not letters. A book. For him. A book about what it means to be a man. Not the kind of man who earns a paycheck or wears a suit. A real man. One who shows up. Who sacrifices. Who protects his own even when it's thankless. Especially when it's thankless. Page after page, I poured in what he had forgotten. Or never knew. And then, one night, after everything had gone silent again, I received a message that made me stop cold. It wasn't from him. It was from her. And she wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was warning me. The message from her was short, cold. It wasn't coded in fake politeness or false regret. There was no, "I hope you're well," "No, we miss you." Just a handful of words, carefully chosen like knives. "If you don't stop interfering, we'll go legal." That was it. No signature. No explanation. Just the arrogant assumption that I would see those words and panic. But I didn't panic. I laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh. Not the kind that bursts out in public and makes people look. It was slow and low and full of something deeper than amusement. Something bitter. The kind of laugh a man gives when he's been warned about a house fire that he already set himself. Legal? She wanted to make it legal? She forgot who had built everything they stood on. She forgot whose name was still on the papers, whose money had laid the foundation under their home, their lifestyle, their illusion of independence. She forgot that she had never been fighting a frail old man, but a man who had lived long enough to see how people change when comfort becomes entitlement. Still, her message told me something important. They were unraveling. The cracks weren't just under the surface anymore. They were starting to show on the outside. And if she was desperate enough to threaten me, it meant she was scared. Not of me, but of what would happen if I didn't come back. Good. I wanted her to be scared. I didn't respond. I saved the message. Screen captured it. Printed it. Filed it. Not because I feared a legal fight, but because I always liked having receipts. Then I called a friend of mine, an attorney. Retired, but still sharp. A man who owed me more than one favor from the days when I helped him out of a nasty land deal. I told him what was going on. I didn't give him the emotional version. I gave him the clean facts, the documents, the paper trail. He chuckled when I read her message aloud. "Let her try," he said. "You're protected. She's got nothing." That's all I needed. My next step wasn't loud. I didn't post online. I didn't show up at their door. I didn't threaten or yell. I wrote a letter to her. Just 3 paragraphs. Calm, precise, acknowledging her message, correcting a few things, reminding her politely of the assets I still legally held partial control over. The property. the accounts, the stocks set aside in a trust for their kids that she didn't even know I controlled. I made it clear that I had no intention of using my rights maliciously, unless provoked. Then I mailed it, not through email, not even regular postage, certified, signature required. Let her feel that envelope in her hand. Let her wonder what was inside before she opened it. Let her eyes track every line like they were reading a will, hoping it would end in mercy. Didn't. That same day I made another move. I visited the elementary school, not to cause a scene, but because I knew someone on the staff. An old colleague's daughter worked as a counselor. I asked her, quietly, respectfully, how the kids were doing. Her face changed. She didn't share much, couldn't, for privacy reasons. But she said enough. Missed days, emotional shifts, acting out, drawing strange things. One of them had asked why Grandpa didn't come anymore. That broke something in me. I hadn't thought of them in all this as much as I should have. I'd been so focused on the lesson, the justice, the silence, that I had forgotten the ones caught in the crossfire. They weren't guilty. They weren't cruel. They were just kids. And I loved them. So I made a decision. I went to a lawyer, not for war but for clarity. I wanted to know my rights. Grandparents don't get the same protections. But I had options. Visitation, mediation. I had to tread carefully, because as much as I wanted to teach their parents a lesson, I couldn't punish the innocent to reach the guilty. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. No calls. No texts. No letters. It was the calm that comes after a building collapses. The dust still hanging in the air, and everyone wondering who's buried underneath. Then one morning, I got a knock at my new door. It wasn't him. It was a courier. An envelope. No return address. Inside a check. A single check made out to me. The exact amount I had loaned them for their house. Every dollar. Not a cent more. Not a cent less. No note. No explanation. That was her move. That was her way of saying, "Here's your money. Now stay gone." She thought she could pay her way out of guilt. She thought returning the money made things even. But money doesn't heal betrayal. I didn't cash it. I left it on my kitchen table for 3 days, just staring at it. It wasn't the amount that offended me. It was the arrogance. The belief that debts are only financial. On the 4th day, I wrote another letter. This one was for my son. I didn't threaten. I didn't accuse. I didn't even mention her. I wrote about legacy, about what we pass down, about how sometimes it's not money or property but how we treat those who raised us. I reminded him of the times he was sick and I stayed by his bed, the nights he had nightmares and I sat in the hallway until he fell asleep. The afternoons I sat in the car waiting outside his school, just so he'd never walk home alone. And I ended it with one line. "You looked me in the eye and told me to leave, so I did. Now it's your turn to figure out what that silence cost you." Then I mailed it. No signature required. Let him feel what it's like to wait, to wonder, to check the mailbox every day hoping for something that might never come. Let him sit in the silence I once endured. I didn't hear back for another week. And then, I got a call. From a number I didn't recognize. I answered. His voice was shaking. "Dad." He paused. I didn't say anything. "Can we talk? Please." I didn't reply. Not right away. I listened. To the silence between his breaths. To the cracking in his throat. "Please," he said again. "I can't do this without you." That was the first time I felt his voice carry weight. Not obligation. Not guilt. But something real. I ended the call without speaking. Let him feel that again. Let him feel that weight. But I wrote one more thing that night. Not a letter. A will. And in it I didn't cut him out. I didn't punish. But I changed one detail. The executor. It was no longer him. He would receive what he was due. But he would not control it. That was my final move. Quiet, permanent, and unseen. Because revenge isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it's measured, patient, surgical. I remember sitting in that small house I'd moved into, the one far enough from the city to feel the quiet press in on me like a second skin. The walls thin and the floorboards creaking under the weight of my own thoughts. The house itself a reflection of how my life had shrunk and narrowed into this singular focus. Waiting, watching, calculating. And in those long hours of solitude, I found myself thinking not only about what had been lost, but about what could never be regained. The silence from my son, once so deafening, had become a heavy shroud that wrapped around me, squeezing every ounce of hope and replacing it with a cold resolve that no amount of pleading or apologies could thaw. Each day I'd wake with the same question burning at the back of my mind. Was this what it meant to be discarded, to be cast aside by your own flesh and blood, the very person you sacrificed for without hesitation or complaint? But beneath the bitterness, the betrayal, there was also a strange clarity that only suffering can bring, the realization that love and respect are not interchangeable, that giving everything does not guarantee a place at the table, and that sometimes the only way to teach a lesson is through absence so absolute that it echoes louder than any confrontation, louder than any shouting match or tearful apology. And so I sat there, in that quiet, peeling house, writing endlessly. Not letters, not angry rants, but a detailed ledger of everything, a meticulous account of every favor granted, every loan made, every moment I had chosen their happiness over my own dignity, knowing that one day this document would serve as a mirror for my son to finally see what his indifference had cost him. I pictured him pacing his own living room, the same one I had helped them buy, the walls closing in as the reality of what he had lost seeped into every corner, the warmth of a father's presence replaced by cold, hollow space. It was not revenge in the way most think of it. It was more like justice wrapped in time and silence, a slow-burning fire that would consume the bridge between us until nothing was left but ashes to remind him of what once was. I refused to be the broken man begging to be forgiven. Instead, I became the shadow at the edge of their lives, the ghost in the margins of their days, reminding them with every silent hour that respect is earned and easily lost, and that sometimes even a father's love has a breaking point. And as the weeks slipped by, I began to see the fractures widening, the way their polished facade cracked under pressure. Missed deadlines, whispered arguments, empty rooms where laughter once lived, and the slow unraveling of a family that thought it could live without its roots. My son called again, voice raw with desperation, promising change, begging for a second chance, but I held firm. No words could erase the memory of that cold sentence he delivered. No tears could mend what had been torn. My final act was a quiet one. Rewriting the will, changing the executor's name, giving the responsibility to someone who would honor the legacy and not betray it. A decision made not out of spite, but out of sorrow, knowing that the boy I raised had become a man I could no longer trust. Revenge, I realized, is not in the fury but in the patience. It is in the slow dismantling of what was taken for granted, in the measured steps that ensure a lesson is learned, even if it costs a lifetime. And so I waited, in my small house, surrounded by silence, waiting for the day when my son would understand that some doors, once closed, do not easily open again. In the quiet that had settled over my life, I found a strange clarity that only comes with being pushed to the edge, the kind of clarity that cuts sharper than any angry words or desperate pleas. Each day, I traced the steps that had led me to this lonely place, the years of sacrifice that had gone unnoticed, the silent dinners where I swallowed my pride to keep the peace, the countless moments I had set aside my own dreams to build a foundation for theirs. Yet all that love, all that effort, was met with a coldness so profound it could have frozen the very air around us. I thought back to the moment my son looked me in the eyes and told me to leave, and I realized that was not just a dismissal of a father, it was a rejection of a past, a future, and a legacy. I lived through memories, flickering like old film reels, of scraped knees I bandaged, broken toys I fixed, late nights spent watching over him while he slept through fever. Those memories were not just sentimental shadows but proofs of a bond severed too easily, replaced with silence and legal threats. Yet I did not mourn as others might have expected. Instead, I carefully crafted a new kind of presence in his life. A presence made not of appearances or gifts, but of absence, of the void left when a foundation is withdrawn. The absence was my voice, my lesson, my final attempt to show that love is not infinite, that it requires respect to thrive, and that sometimes the most profound revenge is not in breaking a man, but in letting him face the world without his safety net. I watched from afar as the pressures mounted on their fragile family, the arguments that echoed through thin walls, the tension that coiled like a serpent in every whispered conversation. I received fragmented reports from old friends and distant relatives, tales of stress and frustration, of financial strain and emotional exhaustion. The very comforts they had taken for granted began to crumble, and with them, the illusions that had blinded them to the cost of their cruelty. I was not a man seeking to destroy, but one who understood the gravity of consequences. And with every missed call, every unanswered message, I knew the lesson was sinking in. When the legal threats arrived, I welcomed them, not as a challenge, but as a confirmation that the truth had rattled their carefully constructed lives. I countered quietly with documents and lawyers, with calm reminders of ownership and responsibility, not to provoke, but to protect what was mine, what was ours. The day I changed the executor of my will was the day I sealed the future, knowing that sometimes love demands boundaries as fierce as any battle. This wasn't about punishment, it was about teaching, about demanding that the bonds of family be honored or be broken forever. And so I waited, wrapped in the cold armor of my decision, ready to face whatever came next with the steady resolve of a man who had given everything and refused to be forgotten. The days blurred into one another, each stretching endlessly like the slow ticking of a clock counting down to a reckoning that seemed both inevitable and unbearable. I sat in the solitude of my small home, the worn pages of my journal filling rapidly with thoughts, regrets, and plans. Writing became my sanctuary, a place where I could pour out the storm inside without fear of judgment or interruption. My pen traced the contours of a father's love, wounded but not broken, a love that demanded recognition and respect even in the face of betrayal. The letters I sent, never delivered directly to him but left in places he might find, were crafted with precision, each word weighed to strike not with anger but with undeniable truth. I reminded him of who we were, of what we had shared, and of the path he had chosen to walk away from. I knew pride had blinded him, that the fragile ego wrapped in new authority had made him forget the roots from which he sprang. Yet, beneath the frustration, there remained a thread of hope. Hope that the boy who once clung to my finger would one day understand the magnitude of what had been lost. Meanwhile, life continued its relentless march. Reports trickled in from school counselors about the children, my grandchildren, who now faced confusion and fear without the steady presence they once felt from their grandfather. I reached out quietly, not to disrupt but to offer support, knowing that even amidst chaos, family ties run deep and sometimes the smallest gestures can bridge the widest gaps. I refused to be the villain in their story. I wanted to be the quiet guardian in the shadows, the steady hand ready to catch them should the world prove too harsh. Financially, the strain was evident. Without my backing, bills went unpaid, deadlines missed, and the comfortable lifestyle they had grown accustomed to began to unravel. The rent checks I once sent stopped arriving, the repairs left undone. I knew this was painful, but it was necessary, for growth, for realization, for the rebuilding of foundations stronger than money or convenience. I often imagined the arguments that must rage in their home, the whispered accusations, the bitter recriminations as they struggled to hold on to what was slipping through their fingers. I was not cruel, I was firm. I was not without empathy, I was with purpose. And through it all, I held to the belief that redemption is earned, not given, and that true respect can only be won when the price has been paid in full. Then, one evening, a call came that shattered the quiet. My son's voice, trembling and raw, filled with desperation and something closer to humility than I had heard in years. He asked to talk, to meet, to try again. But I stayed silent, knowing that words without actions are empty, and that trust, once broken, is a delicate thing that demands time to mend. The game had changed, the stakes higher than ever, and I was ready for the next move, knowing full well that in this chess match of hearts and honor, patience was my greatest weapon. The shift came gradually but unmistakably. What had once been icy silence was now punctuated by moments of tentative contact, a flicker of light in the long shadows that had enveloped us. My son's calls became more frequent, less strained, and although I did not always answer, I listened closely to every message, catching the subtle shifts in tone, the undercurrents of regret and longing that threaded through his words. It was as if he was beginning to peel back the layers of resentment and pride that had blinded him, slowly uncovering the boy who once looked up to me with trust and love. Meanwhile, the woman who had once wielded power like a shield began to falter, her threats replaced by quiet inquiries, her arrogance softened by the creeping weight of consequences she had never anticipated. She reached out indirectly at first, through mutual acquaintances, through hesitant letters, and I responded with the calm assurance of a man who had already won the battle of wills. I made it clear that I held no grudges, only expectations, that the wounds inflicted were not forgotten but could be healed if approached with sincerity and respect. The grandchildren, caught in the middle of this storm, became the unexpected catalysts for change. I made arrangements to see them, to be present not as an intruder but as a steadying force, bringing gifts not of material wealth but of time and attention. Their faces, full of innocence and confusion, reminded me why this battle mattered. Not for pride, not for money, but for family. As bridges began to rebuild, I never lost sight of the lessons learned. I maintained the changes to the will, a reminder that while forgiveness is possible, trust is not freely restored. I insisted on honest conversations and accountability, demanding that the past be acknowledged, not erased. And through it all, I felt the weight of years, the sacrifices made, the wounds healed and reopened, and the fragile hope that one day, perhaps, we could move beyond the pain to something stronger, something real. The journey was far from over, but the first steps had been taken, and in those steps lay the promise of redemption. Not just for them, but for me as well.